Thank you so much. It is great to be here in Titus County. It is great to have the opportunity to follow, number one of the great heroes of the past century, one of the great heroes certainly of my life and of everyone's life in here. And then also to have the opportunity to follow Congressman Hall, truly a legend representing the state of Texas. Thank you for your service. Thank you. I don't know how many of y'all saw in the news this past week that the inventor of the teleprompter passed away. It's actually true. 92 years old, the man who invented the teleprompter. I'm told that when President Obama was informed of this, he was speechless. That really is terrible, but you can't resist a setup on a teleprompter like that. You know, I'll tell you, back in Austin, there's a great Mexican restaurant called El Arroyo, which if you're down there, I recommend it. It's off 5th Street. They have out front, they put a sign, and every week the sign outside El Arroyo comments on what's going on in the world. I remember when the Texas legislature passed the big tort reform plan several years ago. That week, El Arroyo put on its sign, tortilla reform. You don't pay if it's not your fault. You know, that's not my favorite El Arroyo sign, though. My favorite El Arroyo sign is what they put up the week that Obamacare passed. That week, the El Arroyo sign read, "Come on in, try the Obama special. Order anything you like, the next table pays." And you know, that's a profound commentary about where we are right now in this country. What I'd like to do with you tonight is 3 things. Share with you, number 1, why it is I'm running for the U.S. Senate. Number 2, tell you why it is I believe we're going to win this race. And number 3, talk to you about how you can help. Let's start with why I'm running. America is at a crossroads. We are facing one of the most consequential decisions in the history of our nation. President Barack Obama is the most radical president this nation has ever seen. And he's a true believer. He is a true believer in his heart in government. Whatever the problem, whatever the issue, government is the solution. And in the last 2 years, the size, power, and spending of the federal government has increased further and faster than at any time in our history. As a consequence, we're facing what I consider to be the epic battle of our generation. Quite literally a battle over whether we remain a free market nation. If we continue going down the road to more and more power being drawn into Washington, the consequence will be the loss of the freedom and the opportunity that all of us have been blessed to enjoy in the greatest and freest and most prosperous nation on earth. And yet I have to tell you, I am incredibly optimistic. And I'm optimistic for one reason. This president has been so radical. He has sparked a great awakening. An awakening that is sweeping the state of Texas, it's sweeping the nation. Millions of Americans are standing up to defend liberty. Let me ask you, how many of y'all have been to a tea party? These things are incredible. They're absolutely incredible. You know, one of the things I enjoy most is watching the mainstream media, or liberal Democrats, but I repeat myself, watching them try to explain the tea parties. My favorite explanation is that they're an organized project of the Republican National Committee. Now, I don't know if there ever has been an organized project of the Republican National Committee. But if there has, these ain't it. We are seeing an organic movement of the people. Millions of men and women and children standing out in blistering hot days to defend liberty, to defend free market principles, and to defend the Constitution. And as a result, we saw an extraordinary result in 2010. As the American people stood up as loudly as humanly possible and said no to the Obama agenda. Now, I think the central issue in the U.S. Senate primary in Texas is going to be which candidate is best prepared to stand up and fight to stop the Obama agenda. Okay. That's the issue, and that is why I'm running. That is the entirety of why I'm running, is to stand up and defend liberty and free market principles and the Constitution. You know, I'll tell you, like so many of you here, my views and principles come in very significant part from my family background. I'd like to share with you a little bit about it. My mother is Irish and Italian. She was born in Wilmington, Delaware. Her mother was the second youngest of 17 kids. They were Irish Catholic. They didn't know what else to do on a Saturday night. It was a working class family. I used to say that basically in the state of Delaware there were really two families. There were the DuPonts that owned everything. And there was my family that worked in the factories. Well, when my mother was in high school, her father was transferred down to Houston. And my mom became the first person in her family ever to go to college. She drove down the street and applied to the closest university. It happened to be Rice University. And she was admitted to Rice. Now the amazing thing is, since no one in the family had ever gone to college, she didn't know Rice was Rice. But it was just the college down the street and she got in. So my mom went to Rice. She graduated in 1956 with a degree in math. And she then went to work at Shell as a computer programmer. Now my mother used to tell me, she said she very deliberately did not learn how to type. And she said, look, it was the 1950s. I understood the world I was living in. And if I was walking down the hall, a man would stop me and say, sweetheart, would you type this for me? And she wanted to be able to smile very sweetly and say, you know, I would love to help you out. But I don't know how to type. I guess you're going to have to use me as a computer programmer instead. And my mom, my whole life, has been a best friend to me. She is a woman of steely character and courage and perseverance. My dad was born in Cuba. He grew up in Cuba. And as a teenager, Avery, how old are you? 15. When my dad was 14, he began fighting in the Cuban Revolution. As a kid, and most of the people fighting in the revolution were 14 and 15-year-old boys. He fought for 4 years in the revolution. When he turned 17, he was captured and thrown in prison and tortured. They beat my father almost to death in prison. My grandfather found him in prison and bribed the prison guards to get him out. And at that point, he fled the country. He applied to several U.S. universities, and the University of Texas is the first one to let him in. So in 1957, my dad arrived in Austin, Texas. He was 18 years old, and he didn't speak a word of English. He had no possessions, except he had a slide rule in his pocket, which, you know, whenever I talk to young people, they have no idea. And he also had $100 sewn into his underwear, which my grandmother put there so they wouldn't take it from him. He went and got a job as a dishwasher, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked 7 days a week. He paid his way through his school. He got a job. He started a business. And he worked towards the American dream. Now, my entire life, my father has been my hero. But when I was a kid, my dad used to say to me all the time, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? And I'll tell you, no question better explains why it is I'm running for U.S. Senate. if we don't stand up right now and stop the Obama agenda, if we don't stand up right now and stop the exploding power of the federal government, the exploding debt and deficit, if we don't stop this right now, our kids and grandkids will not enjoy the freedom and opportunity we have. And the great honor about being here is I know the men and women in this room are not content to let freedom slip away. Each of you are here because you're committed to standing up to fight to preserve that liberty for the next generation. All right, so that's number one, why I'm running. Number two, why I believe we're going to win. Now, you may have heard there are a couple of other candidates in this race. There are right now 5 candidates in this race. They're all good people. They're all friends of mine whom I like and respect. And I have no intention of saying an ill word about anyone. But I'll tell you, we're going to run on 2 very simple themes. And based on these 2 themes, I believe we're going to win this race. Number 1, new leadership. You know, 2010 showed powerfully that the American people are fed up with tired, incumbent establishment leaders. A big part of the reason Barack Obama got elected in 2008 is that Republicans had lost their way. We weren't standing for much of anything. And the Republican Party deserved to get our teeth kicked in. 2010 was incredible because you saw all over the country, whether it was Marco Rubio in Florida, or Mike Lee in Utah, or Rand Paul in Kentucky, or Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, all over the country, Americans said we want new leaders who have fire in them, who really believe in principles of limited government and individual liberty, who aren't just reading talking points, but are there to fight to restore the Constitution. I think that's exactly what the voters of Texas want, is new leadership that is standing up ready to fight. The second theme that we're running on is a proven conservative record. Every one of us is tired of politicians who come in front of us and say what it is we want to hear. It's really not difficult to tell a group of Texans what they want to hear if you're willing to say anything. And unfortunately, that seems to be one of the job requirements for politics. You know, one of the things I like to point out, if you go to any candidate's website, they always have an issues page. And there are a series of issues, A, B, C, D, and E. And if you go to any statewide candidate in a Republican primary in the state of Texas, every single one of them will have word for word the identical answer on each of those issues. If it weren't so serious, it'd be funny. But literally, word for word, they parrot the identical answer on every single issue. And the reality is, any consultant worth 2 nickels can tell you there's a right answer to A, there's a right answer to B. That's one of the consultants calling now, telling us the answer to C. I like to point out, if you go to my website, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. If you go to my website, one of the first things you notice is we don't have an issues page. Instead, what there is a page that is labeled a proven record. And what it says is, for too long, politicians have said one thing and done another. Each of us should ask any candidate who shows up in front of you, you say you believe these principles. Show me. When have you stood up and fought for them? When have you bled for them? And what have you accomplished? You shall know them by their deeds. And what it then says is, for the past decade, Ted has been fighting for conservative principles over and over again, and winning on a national level. Colon. And what follows is 3 pages of bullet points, laying out my record fighting for these principles. Let me give you some examples. As Irwin mentioned, I served 5.5 years as the Solicitor General of Texas. I was appointed by Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott, who in my opinion is the finest Attorney General in all 50 states. During the 5.5 years I was in office, Texas over and over again led the nation defending conservative principles. We defended the Ten Commandments monument on the state capitol grounds. We took it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Attorney General Abbott argued the case and did a spectacular job, and we won 5-4. We began this meeting by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. All of us remember not several years ago when the Federal Court of Appeals in California struck down the Pledge of Allegiance because it included the words, "One nation under God." Texas brought together a coalition of all 50 states. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, we defended the Pledge of Allegiance, and we won unanimously. Another issue, one I know nobody in this room cares about. The Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. In the D.C. gun case, Texas took the lead defending the Second Amendment. We brought together a coalition of 31 states defending the individual right to keep and bear arms. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won 5-4. And in a case that I think was most significant of all the cases I handled as Solicitor General, it's a case called Medellin versus Texas. Now, Medellin began with a truly horrific crime in Houston, where 2 teenage girls were tragically gang raped and murdered in the early 1990s. I grew up in Houston. Houston is a city hardened to violent crime, and yet this was a crime so horrible it really shocked the conscience. Well, the case took a very strange turn because the World Court, which is the judicial arm of the United Nations, issued an order to the United States to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. It's the first time in the history of our nation a foreign court has tried to bind the U.S. justice system. Texas stood up and fought the World Court, and we fought the United Nations. We took the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I had the honor of arguing this case twice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. On the other side were 90 foreign nations. The entire European Union, most of Latin America, all of them came in against us, arguing that the U.S. justice system should be totally subservient to the World Court of the United Nations. And also on the other side was the President of the United States. The President signed a 2-paragraph order that attempted to order the state courts to obey the world. So Texas stood up, we fought the World Court. We fought the United Nations. We fought 90 foreign nations, and we fought the President of the United States. We defended U.S. sovereignty, which is what that case is fundamentally about. And we won 6-3. This is a time when we have a serious fight going on in our nation. A serious fight where we need leadership. You know, my wife Heidi and I are blessed to have 2 beautiful little girls. A 3-year-old daughter, Caroline, and a 6-month-old daughter, Kathy. And I will tell you, I'm being totally objective in this and impartial, that they are the most adorable creatures. As you know, when you're the parents of small kids, you think about the future of the country and the path we're on. You think about the path of fiscal and economic ruin that this president has put us on. And you know, President Barack Obama is a tremendously effective defender of his vision of government. He's a tremendously persuasive speaker defending government control of the economy and our lives. And I'll tell you right now what is so frustrating, what is maddeningly frustrating, is there's an almost total void of leadership on the other side. You know, how many people right now in national politics inspire you? How many people are standing up and effectively defending free market principles, effectively defending liberty, standing up and taking on the Obama agenda head on? Most people, when I ask them that question, they can't fill the fingers on one hand. And I'll tell you one thing that I have told conservative activists and Tea Party leaders throughout this state. If I am elected to the U.S. Senate, and I simply go there and vote right 100% of the time, I will consider myself an abject failure. Because the reason I'm running is I intend to be standing in front, helping lead the fight, to stop the Obama agenda and to defend our liberty. And a commitment I will make to each of you, if I am not standing there with arrows up and down my torso, I won't be doing my job. And I'm asking each of you now, hold me accountable. If 4 years from now I come back and am doing anything less than that, say to me, Ted, you told me you'd do more than just pull a lever. That you'd go to Washington to help lead this fight. So that's number one, why I'm running. That's number two, why it is I believe we can win. Number three, how can you help? I'm going to suggest to you 4 things you can do that will make a real difference. Number one, come to our website, tedcruz.org. 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 If you forget it, it's tedcruz.org. Come to our website and sign up. It's a very easy step. And in fact, there's an even easier version. Each of you has in front of you a brochure with a sign-up card. If you sign up today, Josh, who's in the back, will pick up those cards. But sign up and join our team. We are building a conservative grassroots army all across the state of Texas and all across the country. Number two, join us on Facebook. We have an incredible team on Facebook. You know, it's very interesting. Every politician likes to talk about they've got great grassroots support. And part of the reason for that is it's easy to say. It's mushy, it's amorphous, you can't measure it, so everyone can say, oh, you know, I've got terrific grassroots support. One of the nice things about Facebook is it gives an objectively verifiable metric. A measure that's publicly available. I am honored to tell you we have over 57,000 supporters on Facebook, which is the most of any statewide official in Texas. The other 4 candidates in this race for U.S. Senate have between 1,000 and 8,000 supporters on Facebook. We have over 57,000. We've got more than the governor, which I've got to tell you is crazy. I mean, look, I'm a lawyer in Houston who ain't elected to nothing. And we've got more supporters on Facebook than any statewide official in Texas. But there's a reason for that. And the reason has very little to do with me. The reason is simple. People are hungry for leadership. They're hungry for leadership to stand up and fight the Obama agenda and to defend liberty. Sue, I have to tell you a funny story. Last week I was doing a radio interview. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Actually, it was about 5. It was drive home. It was about a 15-minute interview. It went pretty well. I called my campaign manager afterwards, and he said, I said, hey, what'd you think? How did it go? He said, I thought it went great, except you said 5 times, people are hungry for leadership. And I said, well, I didn't get lunch today. That actually was a true story. I was starving, and Josh was sitting outside the car holding my lunch, so I was looking at it, and oddly enough, people were really hungry for leadership during that radio call. So the brain is a curious thing. The third thing you can do, contribute. You know, one of my heroes in Texas politics was former Senator Phil Graham. And Senator Graham had a great thing he used to say. He used to say, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is we have all the money we need to win this race. The bad news is most of it's still in your pockets. You know, I'll tell you, we have seen phenomenal fundraising success. We launched this campaign just 13 weeks ago. The campaign is just getting started. 10 days ago, all the candidates released their first quarter fundraising. In the first 10 weeks of our campaign, we raised over $1 million. We raised over $100,000 a week. And I'll tell you, even more than the total, what was so meaningful was the way it came in. It came in from 1,147 contributions from 122 Texas cities all over the state and from 37 states all over the country. 70% of it came in online. We saw literally an army of people across Texas and the nation. The day we launched, over and over again, people coming online, little old ladies in Florida and California and Chicago and New York and Kentucky, going online and giving $10 or $25 or $50. And every day, people maxing out at $5,000 or $10,000. And I will tell you, I will ask every one of you that can to contribute. If you can write a big check, that's wonderful. But if you can write a small check, you know, it's an amazing thing. If you contribute $10, it makes a big difference in how you interact with the campaign. Because the difference is you have skin in the game. You're invested in it. If you contribute $10 or $25, when you go home and talk to your neighbors, when you talk to your family, when you talk to your friends, suddenly you're part of this team, you're invested in it, and you bring up this race. And I would ask each of you to do it online, or even better, Josh, wave again, Josh in the back. Josh has forms, and we can take checks or credit cards tonight. But make a contribution. And then the fourth very simple thing. Find 5 friends to do the same. The way we have built the campaign team is one at a time. It's been a grassroots army. It has been individuals reaching out. And you know, Krista, it's a wonderful thing. If you talk to your friends and neighbors, people who trust you and know you, you're saying, this race matters. I know this guy. You need to get involved and support him. You know, that matters more than a dozen television ads. One person they know and trust. Now, every one of us has friends and neighbors right now that with some regularity are yelling at the televisions. Are there any TV yellers here? I'll admit I yell at the television set more than a little bit, particularly when our president's on. We all have friends and neighbors. You know, recently, we just saw 2 weeks ago the president saying, we've got to get serious about cutting the budget. It's a little bit like Charlie Sheen saying, we've got to get serious about sobriety. The next time your friends and neighbors are yelling at the television set, saying how concerned they are about the direction the country is going, about the direction Barack Obama is taking, you have an easy answer of, you know, instead of yelling at the television set, you can make a difference. There's a race here in Texas that I think matters, and you can get involved in and make a difference. And if you reach out and tell 5 of your friends to do the same, that's exactly how we built the team. It's how we're going to continue building the team. And it's why, at the end of the day, this is a race we're going to win. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
I know you said you're conservative. I know conservatives work hard nationally to get people elected, and we're seeing them maybe backing away from their conservative stance on the budget. What guarantee do we have that you're not going to do that?
It's a fabulous question. I'll say a couple of things. Number one, the best guarantee I would point to is to look to my proven record. And, you know, before I was Solicitor General, I worked in the U.S. Justice Department. And John Ashcroft was my boss there. And Ashcroft used to say, if I'm ever accused of being Christian, I'd like there to be enough evidence to convict me. Now that is powerfully true, but it is equally true of being a conservative. If you're really a conservative, you shouldn't have to tell people. If you're really a conservative, you will have been fighting the fights over and over again. You will have been in the foxholes, and you will bear the stripes of those battles. The best way to know how someone will handle adversity and whether they will stand up and fight for their principles is if they have done so over and over and over again before. The way I urge folks to make a decision between the various candidates in this primary is I suggest to them, if they want to assess the different candidates, to sit down at their computer for 15 minutes. Go to the websites of every candidate in this race and ask themselves one simple question. Not what do we say, because anyone can stand at a podium and say anything. Don't ask what pretty speeches can the candidates give on the topics you like. Ask yourself one simple question. And in fact, take out a notepad and write, what are the 5 most significant things this candidate has accomplished for conservative principles? Now, I'll tell you, I've done that exercise with respect to the rest of the field. And with a number of the candidates, it's not easy to get to 5. If you make that comparison, what you will find is there is only one candidate in this race who has over and over and over again been standing up, fighting for these principles, and that has a proven record of doing so. A second thing, I'll comment on. 2 weeks ago, as you know, we just had the, quote, $38 billion budget deal. Now, sadly, we have to put that in quotes, because we discovered afterwards $38 billion was really more like $300 billion. Now, Politico called every Republican Senate candidate in the country and asked them at the time Congress was voting on this, how would you vote on the budget deal? For me, the answer was very easy. I said I would unequivocally vote no. And I said, look, we have a $1.6 trillion annual deficit this year. Even if the $38 billion was real and not smoke and mirrors, that's less than 3% of our deficit this year. That is not a serious response to a fiscal and economic train wreck. And, I'll give you an example that helps bring those numbers home to reality. Which is, imagine you have a teenager who takes the family credit card and goes and racks up $160,000 in debt on a family credit card. And your teenager comes to you, Jim, and says, Dad, next year, I'm only going to rack up $156,000 in debt. Now, in this analogy, Congress is the irresponsible teenager. And those numbers are exactly right. 160,000 corresponds to 1.6 trillion. And the amount that they were fighting over cutting, $38 billion, is the equivalent of spending $4,000 less in debt and dropping it to $156,000. Now, any reasonable parent would take the credit card and cut it in half. That's what leadership is. And I do think we're at a unique time in history because we have the potential for serious leadership in a way that we have not in a long time. I think the American people are ready for serious, mature leadership to address this fiscal and economic crisis and to put us on the right path.
Ted, you mentioned earlier that you consider yourself a failure if all you did was vote correct. What steps would you envision taking to address, for example, the load of the entitlement system?
It's a fantastic question. Unless we get serious about fundamental entitlement reform, we can't do anything of consequence with the budget. Entitlements and interest on the debt comprise roughly 2/3 of the budget. So at the end of the day, earmarks. Earmarks is an issue lots of people are familiar with. I think earmarks are wrong. In fact, the day I launched the campaign, I pledged never to take an earmark, period. But earmarks are a tiny percentage of budget. If you really want to address the budget, you've got to get to entitlements. Now, historically, as you know, most politicians have been terrified to touch entitlements. Because if you touch entitlements, you immediately get demagogued as taking food from the mouths of little old ladies and strangling children and kicking puppies and kittens. I think we're at a point where people are ready for some serious leadership. Let's take an example, something like Social Security. Social Security is something, look, I intend to fight for fundamental entitlement reform, and I intend to campaign on it because it's the right thing to do. Social Security, we're facing a situation where the expenditures dwarf the upcoming revenue stream. Now, in my view, any serious reform has several components that are really pretty straightforward. First of all, for retirees who are on Social Security or near Social Security, I think we shouldn't change their benefits at all. That we should protect and preserve the benefits for those on or near Social Security because they've worked and paid into the system, and we have an obligation to carry through with that commitment. But you know, for people of my generation, a lot of people in their 20s and 30s and 40s are skeptical they're even going to get Social Security. And with a couple of relatively minor tweaks, you can change the soundness of Social Security pretty significantly. For one thing, I think it makes eminent sense to gradually raise the age of eligibility. When FDR signed Social Security, the age was 65, the average life expectancy was 62. It was designed for a program if you lived into very advanced years to provide some support. Just gradually scaling up the age of eligibility for younger workers has a dramatic impact on the fiscal soundness of Social Security. A second reform. Right now, Social Security goes up greater than the rate of inflation. It goes up tied to the CPI rather than the actual rate of inflation. It's about a 1% differential. If you simply increase Social Security benefits to the rate of inflation rather than exceeding the rate of inflation, that has a dramatic impact scaled over the year on the long-term soundness. And the third piece that I think is important for younger workers is to include a portion of Social Security that is a personal account, that are their assets, that they control, that they own, they can pass on to their kids. And you know, let me actually take a moment digression on that last point to say, something like Social Security personal accounts are indicative of a broader point, which is that personal accounts are not about the rich. Look, the Rockefellers don't need personal accounts. They're going to be just fine taken care of without it. What personal accounts make a real difference for is for people at the bottom of the economic ladder working to climb up. Right now, the status quo, you have an African American man who works as a janitor, works hard, pays into the system for years and years and decades. He retires, he gets benefits for a few years, and he passes away. That's the status quo. You have an Hispanic woman who pays into the system for years and years and years, cleaning houses. She retires for a few years, gets benefits, and passes away. Those exact same low-income workers, if they worked in a system where, as part of their paying into a system, they also accumulated a personal account, even at very, very low income rates, $20,000, $30,000 a year, those workers over the course of 30, 40 years when they retired, they would get benefits still. But they would also have an asset that even at the very modest income wages can be worth $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. And when they pass away, they own that money. Suddenly their kids have an inheritance. And I want you to think of that janitor who worked for years, their kids inheriting $150,000 that they can use to buy a home or start a business or get an education. I mean, that's transformative because it empowers people to accumulate their own assets, to build their own ownership, to take control and responsibility, rather than just to be dependent on government. Historically, most political candidates have been afraid to take on issues like Social Security. I think we've got to take on entitlements, and I think if we're willing to be straight with the American people, I think we're at a point where the American people will take it seriously.
What's your position on immigration?
My position on immigration is very simple. I strongly oppose illegal immigration. And I strongly support legal immigrants. You know, immigration is an issue, I will tell you candidly, I'm not terribly optimistic about. Because I think both parties are more interested in demagoguing and scaring their bases than they are in actually solving anything. If you look at the situation on our border, I approach illegal immigration from the perspective of someone who spent most of my adult life in law enforcement. It makes utterly no sense that we don't know who's crossing into this country. That we have no idea of the criminal backgrounds, of what their history is, that we don't know who they are. In a post-9/11 world, that is lunacy. About 3 weeks ago, I was meeting with a number of South Texas ranchers. One rancher was telling me across his ranch, he said, every day between 20 and 30 people cross his ranch. And what's interesting, he said, actually a lot of the people crossing his ranch are not even Hispanic. They're from the Middle East. They are Chinese women being smuggled in for sex trafficking. And he said the smugglers will steal trucks, they'll crash through the fences. He periodically finds brand new trucks just stuck in the mud in the middle of the field. They leave the truck and go. This federal government doesn't do a thing to stop it. Every day is steady flow. That makes no sense. From a law enforcement perspective, I would do everything humanly possible to close the border so we know who is coming into this country. And in my opinion, that should include all of the tools at our disposal. That should include fences, it should include walls, it should include manpower, border security, it should include technology. It should include a secure Social Security card that can't be reproduced on a Xerox machine. I think we need to get serious about enforcing the border, which unfortunately the federal government has refused to do. Now, at the same time, and I think equally important, we need to be cautious of the rhetoric, as Republicans, we use on this issue. Because sometimes when Republicans are talking quite rightly about the problem of illegal immigration, what people hear is that we don't like immigrants, including legal immigrants. And, you know, to my mind, I actually think, if you think of the history of the United States, there are many respects in which our nation is unique. But perhaps the most unique aspect of our history is that for centuries, we were formed by people from all over the world. I mean, when I told my dad's story, what I find so extraordinary about my dad's story is how commonplace it is. Every one of us in this room has a story like that in our background. Whether it's us or our parents or our great-great-great-grandparents. And if you think of the people that came to this country, often fleeing oppression, the people who came, they weren't the smartest, they weren't the richest, they weren't the strongest. The people who came, our ancestors, were the ones crazy enough to risk everything for liberty and opportunity. And that, in my opinion, leads to what is the fundamental DNA of what it means to be an American, which is to value liberty and opportunity above all else. And that's also precisely why I believe the American people are not going to accept Obamacare and are not going to do what much of Europe has done, which is to willingly take the yoke of socialism. The American people are standing up and saying no, and it is because of that legacy of valuing liberty and opportunity that we're doing it. And so, Ronald Reagan used to refer to legal immigrants as Americans by choice. And I think we need to continue not just to tolerate, but to celebrate that we are a nation of people from all over the world standing up for liberty. And so I think we need to get serious about illegal immigration, but continue to be a nation that embraces legal immigrants who follow the rules and come here to the American. Maybe one more question.
We'll follow up on that one then. So, do you believe that the border should be secure before you talk about an amnesty? In other words, like during Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and he gave an amnesty without closing the borders, and they promised to close the borders. Are you going to take a strong stance on that?
Absolutely. Let me answer in two pieces. Number one, yes, the border should be secure. That's absolutely the first step we should take. Number two, regardless of whether the border is secure or not, I do not support amnesty. I think amnesty is fundamentally unfair. It's unfair to the people who follow the rules. There are millions of immigrants who waited years or decades in line to follow the rules and come here legally. And I think to reward those who broke the law is fundamentally unfair. Yeah. So regardless, I don't support amnesty. Now, let me step back also and make a broader point, though, which is often immigration is discussed in the context of reaching out to the Hispanic community. And I fully agree. It is absolutely critical for Republicans to learn to connect better with Hispanics. In 2004, George W. Bush got between 40 and 44% of the Hispanic vote nationwide. In 2008, John McCain barely got 31%. We lost a third of the Hispanic vote in 4 years. Now, the state of Texas today is already a majority minority state. And you don't have to be a demographer to realize if Republicans get 31% of the Hispanic vote going forward, in very, very short order, Republicans are going to cease to be able to win statewide in the state of Texas. We are right now overwhelmingly Republican. There are 29 statewide elected officials in Texas, all 29 are Republican. No Democrat has won statewide in the state of Texas since 1994. And yet, if we get 31% of the Hispanic vote within a decade, those numbers will switch to 29 statewide elected Democrats. Now, the question then is, well, how do you connect with the Hispanic community? And part of the problem is, most Republicans are horrible at it. They tend to do one of two things. One, we hang up a piñata and throw a Cinco de Mayo party. And it's just condescending and offensive. It just doesn't work. Or number two, what a lot of Republicans do is they try to propose Democrat ones. I will propose a partial welfare state, and they think that that's how you reach out. And I think that is born of a fundamental misunderstanding. In my opinion, the Hispanic community is a profoundly conservative community. If you think of the values that resonate in the Hispanic community, it is faith, a tremendously religious, God-fearing community. Family, patriotism. One fact relatively few people know. Do you know that Hispanics have the highest rate of military enlistment of any demographic group in the country? And it's also, I have a friend who's an Hispanic Democrat in Austin who has supported me politically. He's an entrepreneur, sold business. We were having lunch, and he asked a very interesting question. He said, when is the last time you saw an Hispanic panhandler? And it's a great question. I'll tell you that for me the answer is I don't think I've ever in my life seen an Hispanic panhandler. And the reason in the Hispanic community, it would be shameful to be out there begging. Now, if you want your house painted, you'll have a line of 30 guys willing to work hard to do that. Now, if you think of those values, hard work, responsibility, providing for your family, faith, family, patriotism, and fundamentally the belief in the American dream, those are Republican values. And what we need to do is stand for our values, but communicate them in a way that treats the community with respect and brings them together and shares that their values and ours are one and the same. If we do that, we'll continue to be the majority party. If we don't, we won't. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you.